Okay, so today we're going to go over how we finish the ends of the propeller. A lot of times there's a controversy about if square or rounded tips is better. Generally speaking, round is more efficient. So that's the way I make most of mine. As you can see, I just marked the length that it needs to be. And then I take anything that's perfectly round that I can find that fits well, and I'll mark out my shape of how I want it to be. This is a decorative, non-airworthy propeller that I'm using for this video. You can see the defects that are in the wood that make it non-airworthy. So then after I draw my template onto the end, I go ahead and take it to the bandsaw and cut off the extra. Generally, while I'm sanding it, this is the last part I do, is shaping the tips. So generally I leave it a 1/2 inch too long, so on each side, so I can get a rough balance before I do the tips. But then I just cut it with the bandsaw, and then I get closer to the line with the drum sander and just smooth it up exactly to the line, to the perfect smooth half circle there. And then they're pretty thick after that, so I have to bring it down and smooth it out. If they're too thick, they'll be loud and inefficient, so it's very important. And I blend it all the way back, so it's not like I just take this little bitty bit off and it's thin and it's good enough. I have to blend it, and it blends pretty far back into the blade to get a nice smooth transition. The first thing I use is the belt sander. It takes off, I have like 60 grit on there, so it takes off a pretty good amount of material pretty quickly. Took me a long time to get to this point. I used to use a spoke shave because I couldn't control the sander. I wasn't good enough and precise with the belt sander to do a good job, but I finally got around. I practiced on a lot of decoratives before I actually started on an airworthy one, but I got it down to where I could, and it's a lot faster, so I'm glad I transitioned over to that. It's also kind of hard to see how much material you're taking off, because if you go too far, you'll end up shortening your prop. So it's a little bit at a time, and then you look, and a little bit at a time, and you look, and eventually it gets down to where you feel comfortable enough to going to the next piece of sanding, which I use my orbital sander, palm sander, for that. And so I'm smoothing up just everything that the belt sander left, and putting just a fine blend into the rest of the blade on it. And when I do this, I'm still trying to keep the airfoil all the way to the very end. So generally, 1/3 of the way back from your leading edge should be the thickest part of your propeller. And I try to keep that all the way to the very tip of the prop. And it's probably one of the more challenging parts, because it tends to want to flatten out at the end. So keeping that airfoil all the way to the very end is probably one of my biggest challenges. The whole process is probably about 7 minutes per side. So it really doesn't take that long. And like I said, there's always the debate on square tips or round tips. So generally the only time I do square tips is on a faster propeller. Generally the faster propellers are limited on diameter. And so giving a square tip will actually just give you that little bit extra of blade area that is beneficial because they're already limited on diameter. So leaving the tip square helps give just a tiny, tiny bit more blade area. Square tips are a lot faster, so I do every once in a while when I get that one that needs square tips, it's kind of a relief. It's like, oh, this will be easy. But the round tips are so worth it. And I think they're beautiful too. They are aesthetically more pleasing as far as I'm concerned. So then after I'm done with that sander, I move on to this sander. At this point, I'm at about 110, 120 grit sandpaper just to kind of give it, this is the final sanding to smooth it all out and finish it up. And because this sandpaper is not quite as aggressive, I'll go ahead and do most of the very, very end with this because I don't have to worry about the sandpaper taking off way more than I intended to. It gives me a little bit of cushion for error there. And then the very last thing I do is, of course, do a hand sanding. It helps me feel any areas that I've missed. A lot of times I can feel any bumps or edges better than I can see them. Because sometimes the grain of the wood will play tricks on your eyes and you think that you've smoothed it out and you haven't, or there's a dip there that you didn't notice because of the grain just kind of plays tricks with you. So this is just a nice way to make sure that everything is the way it needs to be, all smoothed up. It's also one of those things where a little bit of a perfectionist, so I could probably sit there and I could probably do the whole thing by hand sanding it just because you have so much more control and you just keep going over it and over it. Nope, I could take a little bit. Nope, it's not perfect right here. Nope, I could take a little bit. I could probably do that for hours. But there it is, finished. And you can see how much it came down for thickness there at the tip. Quite a bit of material that we took off. And like I said there, you can see that I kept that airfoil all the way out to the end. Very important. And that's it. All done.